Before the Mexico City Grand Prix, the governing FIA of Formula One finally punished Red Bull for their minor cost cap breach by cutting their wind tunnel time by 10%. Red Bull had gone over $2.2 million over the $145 million limit and had come to an accepted breach agreement with the FIA. Is this how the FIA punishes teams for going over budget? Welcome to our YouTube channel, and in today's episode, we'll be talking about Red Bull being handed a $7 million fine and wind tunnel penalty by FIA for their Formula One cost cap breach. Ready to dive deep? Let's get started.
Here comes Sebastian Vettel! Through goes Hamilton! Max Verstappen wins a Formula One Grand Prix!
According to the FIA, the Formula One team Red Bull Racing had 13 different types of costs improperly adjusted or excluded from its 2021 cost cap submission. At the Mexico City Grand Prix on Friday, the FIA announced Red Bull's punishments for a minor breach of the $145 million limit during Max Verstappen's first title-winning season, ending more than 2 weeks of speculation and criticism from rivals. Red Bull was forced to admit wrongdoing due to the ABA, with the team $2.2 million over the cap after incorrectly excluding or adjusting several costs. However, the ABA also ended the F1 saga and less severe punishments. Having secured the Constructors' Championship this year in the United States last weekend to go along with Verstappen's second driver's title, Red Bull was already set to have less time in their wind tunnel than their rivals. In Formula One, teams' access to wind tunnel sessions is tiered according to their final finish position. Due to their suspension, Red Bull will only be allowed 25 wind tunnel runs next season instead of the usual 28. If Mercedes finishes as predicted in third place, they will have 32 laps, while Ferrari will have 30. The lowest ranked builder has a total of 46 runs. While some may think that Red Bull got off easy, Sky Sports F1 commentator Martin Brundle said earlier this week that the team could be penalized by a 25% reduction in wind tunnel time. They will still be allowed a $135 million budget next year despite the $7 million fine. For their part, Aston Martin also received their punishment for a breach of procedure on Friday. Due to insufficient full-year reporting documentation for 2021, the team has been fined $450,000. Williams was penalized earlier this year for a similar infraction. You might be asking, how exactly did Red Bull cross the line? After being accused of exceeding F1's new 2021 budget by less than 5%, $7.25 million, Red Bull has been in talks with the FIA since October 10th. Despite cheating accusations from McLaren boss Zak Brown and harsh criticism from other competitors, the team has maintained its innocence. Their overspending totaled $2.2 million, with an exposed $1.7 million due to tax problems. The FIA has confirmed that Red Bull overspent in several areas of the budget, including food and beverage, social security, apprenticeship fees, car spares that were never used, and certain costs that were incorrectly charged to Red Bull powertrains. With Red Bull effectively entering a plea bargain, the FIA was prevented from pursuing the more severe punishments for a minor breach, such as points deduction or a reduction in future caps, as required by the financial regulations. Verstappen's victory over Lewis Hamilton last year was already highly controversial, but he only did it by 8 points. With a rejection of the FIA's terms, the case would have been referred to the cost cap adjudication panel, where the full spectrum of penalties would have been reinstated. The scandal would have been dragged out even further if it had gone to the International Court of Appeals. According to the governing body's March 2018 report, the team inaccurately excluded and/or adjusted costs amounting to a total of £5,607,000. And ended up going over budget by a total of $1,864,000. While Red Bull still views this as a severe penalty, the FIA has addressed concerns that RBR may have attempted to cheat the system by saying, "There is no accusation or evidence that RBR has sought at any time to act in bad faith, dishonesty, or fraudulently, nor has it concealed willfully any information from the cost cap administration." The question is, where did the team go wrong? While the FIA has only released the bare bones of information about which financial regulations were at play, more details have emerged in recent weeks. The public should hear more from Christian Horner later today. The FIA prefaces the list with the following statement. In accordance with the findings of their cost cap administration, Red Bull has acknowledged that it included the following incorrectly in the reporting documentation submitted by it. So, if you're curious, here's a closer look at the specific rules that matter. The first rule states that excluded expenses were overstated in violation of Article 3.1a of the Financial Regulations concerning catering services. This has to do with the high cost of factory catering and the inability to distinguish between the costs of feeding employees who are and are not subject to the cap, such as administrative and marketing staff. The FIA required all catering expenses. The second rule states that the costs as per Article 3.1w of the Financial Regulations regarding consideration and associated employers' social security contributions, the phrase "employee that has been formally placed on indefinite sick leave or disability leave excludes costs associated with such an employee." It has been established that there was a dispute over the financial implications of a senior employee's illness and redundancy. The third is that expenses related to Article 3.1h1 of the Financial Regulations in respect to non-F1 activities, which have already been deducted from the total expenses of the reporting group. All expenses directly attributable to non-F1 activities are not covered under this rule. The next is bonus and employer social security costs as required by Financial Regulations Article 3.1k. After Max Verstappen won the championship, the RBR staff would have been eligible for bonuses. However, the rule prohibits them from receiving these bonuses. The fifth is not making the required upward adjustment to relevant costs when reporting a gain on the sale of fixed assets. When asked what assets were sold, the FIA has been silent. The sixth rule concerns the money spent per Financial Regulations Article 3.1q concerning apprenticeship levies. Apprentices at Red Bull were affected by this rule because it prohibited them from having to pay into Social Security. The seventh rule states that costs associated with the payment of consideration and related employer social security contributions, as required by Article 3.1h2.1 of the Financial Regulations, all social security contributions incurred in respect of any personnel engaged in both F1 activities and non-F1 activities are disregarded under this rule. Inaccurate reporting of material expenses by the requirements of Article 4.1a1 of the Financial Regulations concerning the cost of use of power units. According to this regulation, power unit transactions in connection with an F1 activity must be included in relevant costs at no less than fair value. In 2021, Honda generously provided works power units to Red Bull at no cost to the team. The ninth rule states that expenses related to Article 3.1h1 of the Financial Regulations regarding employers' social security contributions related to consideration. Similar to point 3, this pertains to deducting money spent on things that aren't part of the F1 budget. The 10th rule states that relevant costs understated for purposes of Article 4.1f1b of the Financial Regulations concerning use of inventories, the costs of any unused replacement components can be transferred to the heritage section and subtracted from the total. According to Horner, who lives in Austin, this is the most expensive thing on the list by a factor of 7. At the 11th rule, it states that a clerical error occurred when RBR calculated the costs that Red Bull Powertrains Limited had charged. This is related to the powertrain subsidiary that was supposed to launch in 2021. The 12th rule states that specific travel expenses as per Article 3.1r of the Financial Regulations. This rule prohibits all travel and lodging expenses for employees attending a competition or testing new car models. And the final rule states that repair expenses, as required by Financial Regulations Article 3.1i. Costs associated with human resources activities, financial activities, and legal activities are not included. Well, now you know how it happened. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and activate notifications so that you can get all of our new content.